Hello everybody. This is a recording of our Frankenorg session. It's where 5 members of our big community have shared 8 examples of where they've adapted and implemented integrated governance. I hope we can share the salient points for everyone else to understand and exploit. Simple agenda today. I'll introduce you to what we're going to cover. I'll introduce you to our speakers so you can understand a little bit about them. Each speaker will then outline their story and do some analysis of a topic of their choice across all the stories we're presenting. And we'll have some questions from a partner or a buddy that has listened to and understood their story as well. We'll then compile some final words from them to give you some advice with what to do with business integrated governance, and we'll open the floor for questions at the end. So who are we all? Allow me please to introduce Veronica, Chris, Greg and Alex, and myself, David. Well, Veronica, welcome to Frankenorg. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in BIG.
Of course, thank you so much, David. Well, my name is Veronica Edwards-Smith. I have spent my whole career in the sort of P3 world, a nice mixture of delivery and above all PMO. And I have come to BIG quite recently, actually, over the last sort of 18 months. It really resonated with me when I found out it was a thing, because it addressed so many of the pain points that I have seen over and over and over again. I've worked in a lot of in quite a number of organizations, and the pain points that BIG looks to address and the gaps are very repetitive. So I'm a big fan and proponent of BIG, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk about my experience.
From Greg. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, David, and good evening, everyone. Or is it good afternoon? I'm never quite sure. It's dark outside, so I'm going to go with the evening. Lovely to meet you. My name is Greg Kravchik. I'm a chartered project professional, and I have got a background, you won't be surprised to know, in projects. And in the last few years, looking more at the PMO side of things as well. I can tell you that I started with BIG, I want to say it's back in 2019. It was around then, wasn't it, David? I'm checking with you. And I can tell you a bit more about my journey. I'm a director and founder at Confluity. My focus is on simplification and project success. And BIG has been a game changer for me. I'm a big fan of BIG, and I can't wait to go big later and tell you more about my experience. Thank you.
Alex is, well, we've been known each other for a long time, Alex, haven't we?
We have. I think we met at various APM things and rewriting one of the bodies of knowledge, which must be at least 15 years ago. David was evidently a graduate apprentice in those days. So I'm Alex Shapley. I do project, program, portfolio management, some interim head of projects roles, a bit of business change. About 2/3 of the last 20 years of my career has been mid-flight recovery, and I've worked with some people here doing mid-flight recovery. One of the founding directors of BIG, on and off as work and life has allowed. I've been very involved with development of BIG, not so much as a thought leader, but as a thought questioner, I would say. And that's it. I have all the usual qualifications. I'm a member of APM and PMI, and I'm looking forward to telling you about the BIG example, my case study. And for anybody who's interested, I think it's already on YouTube. David, is that correct? David and I did a chat around it a couple of days ago and recorded it. Looking forward to the rest of this session.
Thank you, Alex. I'm David. I'll be very brief. I'm one of the guys that sat down initially and tried to put some thoughts together on what business integrated governance was. I was irritated and frustrated that organizations I work with didn't really have a clear strategy, didn't have a clear pathway from strategy to delivery, were not able to balance resources, weren't pretty strong on accountability. And for all kinds of reasons, I tried to write down all those gripes and invite others to help put together a vision for what integrated governance that connected strategy to delivery might look like. So that's a brief intro to me. Last but not least, Chris. Chris is also one of the founders of BIG, and has been we've been chatting about stuff for probably since about 2019, Chris, if not sooner. I seem to remember.
Yeah, I think probably earlier. So yes, good evening to all. I'm based in Bahrain, so it's a bit later for me here than the rest of you. My background is pretty varied. So I've gone from being a zoologist to doing actuarial work, to IT work, to projects, portfolios, PMOs, and strategic performance management. And a long time back, when people were asking us to come and help implement portfolio management for projects, we found that they didn't have a strategy really. So they'd say, well, I want to align my projects better. And I'd say, well, what with? And have you got a strategy? And they'd say yes, but it would be pretty vague and there wouldn't be any real measures that we could use around that to say, well, which of these various objectives are more important and which ones should we align with first, and which ones will bring you the most benefit and how quickly should they finish, and all those kind of things. And we saw an awful lot of that. And we also did a lot of work in cascading strategy down through an organization and across its various components. And so when I saw David starting with what initially was looking at the core 3PM and making sure you integrate your data and governance across projects and programs and portfolios, it made a lot of sense to me, because I'd spent 30 years doing that for people and finding that it wasn't done very well in most cases. And extending that then logically into making sure that we actually get that governance decision-making, provide the right information for that across the whole organization and keep it all in sync, just makes an awful lot of sense. So it made sense for me to do what I could. I think also in terms of, like Alex, questioning things as much as anything else to make sure that we get those core things into BIG and try and make its value plain to people.
Thanks, Chris. Well, each of us has implemented integrated governance in some shape or form. Chris has actually very kindly provided 4 examples. I think it was Chris, of where that's happened. Greg's example is very current, and that's Alex and Veronica's are a little bit less recent, and mine is an extract and usage of some pieces, which we'll get into. But I'm very grateful that people would introduce themselves so you could see that they were real people and that they haven't just made stuff up. Well, one of the topics we covered, I've signposted Frankenorg as pulling together knowledge and good practice from a whole load of examples. And we're looking to, rather than serially explain in depth our case studies, we're looking to signpost our case studies and point to where those examples are, but then have us focus on the key aspects of an integrated governance project or program, to help people understand maybe what they need to work on in their own scenarios. The first topic that Veronica will talk about, she will look across all of our examples, well, she has looked across all of our examples and has plucked out of those the common pains and expectations that we all felt. I think Greg has then looked across our examples, and he'll introduce you to his too, and talked about the level of the sponsorship level and sponsorship and the senior level engagement that his example and our examples have needed. Alex will talk about the organisation scope as in breadth of organisation units, and which support and which business functions have been involved, and what is his view on that. I will talk about from looking at the big building blocks, the big components. Can I draw any analysis out of our examples? All of us have used most of the components in our examples, but there are definitely two types that are amongst us, and I'll kind of just explain what that means. There's some additional material which we haven't got time to present. We'll talk about what the presenter's role was, just to explain. The material will explain what we did, and we'll also in the material but not presenting explain difficulties experienced, which might be useful to read. And Chris will wrap up this section with the most interesting bit, I guess, on what the benefits have been, what the common benefits have been. Again, leveraging one of his examples. So that's what we're going to do, and let's see how that works. So the content then, it's Veronica to kick off with she's going to present with a recording what her example was at a high level, so we can understand it, and then give us some playback, give us some analysis as to what pains and expectations there were, which I'm probably going to say in the video in a second anyway, so I'll shut up and just play it. Here we go.
Yeah, thanks, David. So as you can see, I've used a composite example. So again, I've worked in multiple organisations, but a lot of the pain points that they were experiencing were very, very thematic across those organisations, even though they were perhaps quite diverse in terms of what they were actually trying to do or how they were organised. And in my particular role, which was frequently in PMO, I find myself trying to implement some of the same things to fill some of the particular gaps that I think PMO is particularly well suited to fill. I think these days we talk more about elevating ourselves into being a value management office or a transformation management office, but even at a lower level, there are some tactical elements of BIG that I think are generally useful. So my organizational example here is focused very firmly on the critical things about prioritization. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't met an organisation yet, David, that doesn't struggle in some part to prioritise effectively. Quite natural. I mean, I get it. We all want to achieve all things and we want to do it now. And obviously, different areas of the business can end up in contention with each other for, the resources to execute their ambitions. But, prioritising, it's just hard. It's just hard. And then obviously good delivery of value, really, forms of value management or absence of value management. So, weak, absent, unrealistic business cases, no method for tracking benefits, whether they were realistic or not in the first place, no reviews of benefits, none of that sort of holding to account retrospectively about did the thing we wanted to do add value. And I don't think there's anything there in the project world necessarily that isn't replicated frequently in BAU or other areas of the business. It's a common theme. We struggle to prioritize. We struggle to say why we want to do what we want to do. We compete for resources in a competitive fashion, not a collaborative fashion. We're not entirely clear about the outcomes that we hope to achieve and the benefits and the value that we would derive from those outcomes. And we don't have the structures in place to enable us to surface, articulate, recognize those benefits. So that's what my example's all about. Yeah, I mean, so much of it does come down to forms of governance, doesn't it? And lack of alignment. It's that lack of goal congruence throughout the whole organization. It's getting everybody to agree what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, really understanding why we're trying to do it, and then linking everything up in terms of supporting systems, data, reporting, objectives, risks, getting everything driving those features. So I thought all the case studies were really interesting, and I love that we've been able to find different examples showing the different facets of both the pains and the solutions. So in his wildlife charity, Greg was faced with inconsistent processes, unclear accountability, obviously such a big theme throughout really everybody's experiences, including my own, and throughout BIG. Poor links between projects and strategy. I'm sure that's very familiar to a lot of people. And limited capacity to demonstrate impact or secure funding. Yep, talking to what I was saying about my own examples, you know, surfacing this stuff is really difficult sometimes. Chris has got actually a number of excellent examples, but all big, very, very large, you know, investment heavy transformations. He reported basically the same thing, but at scale, so even more impactful. Difficult reporting that didn't show what it needed to show, lack of good data to draw on to drive that clear decision making, fuzzy at best accountability, possibly unfair accountability, and competition, competing agendas. Why do we get competing agendas? Again, it's that business somewhat seems structured to force us into competition with each other for scarce resources. Without that clarity of strategy, without that clarity of priority, it's who is the best at competing, isn't it? David, he gave us a better example. Well, you gave us a better example on the BAU side of drowning out strategy. So daily business taking over strategy, basically moving everybody into that sort of value add quadrant 2 work that everybody wants to do, making those longer term changes. I obviously described that, again, that lack of link to strategy and delivery, clarity about outcomes, poor business cases, benefits tracking, again, such a perennial problem that we don't track value, outcomes, benefits well. And Alex gave us a detailed example about unreliable data, unreliable management information and reporting, and a little bit of an interesting spin on some of the cultural behaviours that we frequently see about company culture only really wanting to emphasise certain parts over other parts. So I think the conclusion is we've drawn here from examples from, you know, quite small businesses to very large businesses, from hyper local to extremely international, big and small. This is a common problem. The themes that we are seeing are consistent universally, and so that suggests that there's something bigger going on than just, you know, local, cultural, whatever it may be, factors, doesn't it? And so that's why we have BIG business integrated governance exists, to try to remedy some of this.
Any of the panel have anything to add to that? Does anyone want to emphasise any of those points that Veronica's made?
I'd like to add one thing here, and Veronica rightly points out a lot of the typical problems we get from lack of integrated governance, if you like. Quite often just a plain lack of governance. But if we don't link up, we can have good governance in different units. If we don't link it up, we're still missing a lot of the benefit of having that decision making in place. And we can't collaborate properly. We can't communicate purpose and agree on it properly. We can't deal with uncertainty and risk and identify it properly, etc. So just one thing I'd like to add is that until we've actually got this integrated governance in place and working, we're actually not going to spot a lot of the opportunities that we have to improve our business. And when we do get it working and we get rid of these core pains, if you like, obvious pains, then we will find actually that we've got all kinds of opportunities that come from knowing what's going on and having a team working together, that actually we can do all sorts of extra things. And one of those examples, my fourth case study, I'll talk about a bit later, but that is one of those where we did a massive program outsourcing stuff, but only when we completed that did we find other things that we could do that were not complete implementations of BIG across the whole organization, but said, okay, there's a component of this BIG, now we've got it in place, now we've got the information, we've got people working together, etc. Actually, there's some other things we can do which are going to make our business a lot better.
So thanks, Chris. I mean, yeah, these are real examples of pains that people have addressed, and there's more in the book, but yeah, starting point is pains and expectations, I guess. Moving on, Greg, please tell us about a little bit more about your example, and then delve into sponsorship and stakeholder management that you saw across all of us. Greg, please.
Thank you, David. I will give you some context, and then I'm going to explore my case study from a few different perspectives, as I'm hoping that when I do that, you'll be able to imagine the comparable person in your organization, and therefore you may get a view on how to influence them to take them on that journey. So I'll start with introduction. The project was for the Wildlife Trust, or one of the subsidiaries, and they were 110 people, something like 10-50 million pound turnover, and they had challenges, and they started off as being project challenges about wanting to prioritize, to do resource management better, and to enable consistent delivery. And I'm not really going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about something else, which was the conversations we ended up then having about strategy. And that was the real pain that was felt by an individual that I'm going to come back to in a second. But on context, I think you probably can see the rest on it from there. We were in the project initially and primarily looking at the project and program level, well, actually just the projects. They weren't ready for programs. And we also looked at the components for the portfolio progress group. So we explored and simulated and put in a monthly meeting where we used the off-the-shelf agenda from BIG to look at the portfolio, to ask questions. And we literally used the BIG agenda, and it was brilliant. People loved it. We used the BIG agenda for my project to set all this up. So that was a project in itself, and they loved that too. And we used the portfolio direction group, the quarterly meeting, to set the direction for the next quarter. Everyone loved it. And they loved the concept of having all the data in one place. And that led us to using one tool and having all the projects in there. And it all came from the BIG model. But all of that isn't the important thing here. I think there's a question for you, which is, who in any organization stands to benefit the most? Who feels the pain the most, and who gets the most gain if the strategy is being delivered? It was a rhetorical question. I'm guessing all of you said the same thing, the CEO, right? And in this project, we had the CEO who was championing this. And in one of my earliest conversations, I put it to him, what are your great pains? Which is one of the big components, talks about Nemawashi, your pains and gains, working around the roots to ask people what the problems really are. And it transpired it was the strategy and measuring the impact of the strategy and getting everyone delivering it. That's really what he wanted to get fixed. So he was incredibly receptive when he found out that there is this thing called BIG, that it's based on ISO 37000, so it's good practice, that it's a community interest group, and it's basically up there and available on the internet and can be used. And it went down very, very well, and he was fascinated. But then it got really more interesting. So we had the CEO as a stakeholder, and he was talking to the chair of the board. And the chair, or the outgoing chair, was the ex-director general for GCHQ. There you go. It was quite something to be interviewed and grilled by him. And he absolutely loved BIG and what it did, and it gave that structure. And when I spoke to people down at the ground, the general staff, they loved the idea of BIG because they felt it would give them a transparent, fair model for selecting projects, and they just wanted to know that the right projects are being done. So right to top to bottom, everyone loved it. And I think the moral of the story is here: the CEO is really key, but maybe in many ways, if pressure needs to be brought to bear on a CEO to think about strategy delivery, it's the chair who can really bring that conversation to the fore. And that's where I'm now working with another organization. So from a sponsorship perspective, that's really where we need to come in. And I think on the next slide, David, we've got some examples of the other case studies. And I really love this. I've spoken to you about the CEO and trustees, but also the general staff. And we've got down some excellent examples here. Chris's Telecoms one, again, CEOs, CIOs. We're talking executive level here, aren't we? The Prime Minister, there you go. You heard it here first, folks. That's the level we operate at with BIG. David's example, boards and heads of functions and sponsors, and Veronica's got COO, CEO, CF. There's a lot of C's there, isn't there? There's a lot of C's, and that's fascinating. For me as a career project professional, using BIG has allowed me to reframe what I do as delivering strategy, particularly in a PMO role. But it's given me that language of let's deliver a strategy and let's put the system in place. And there's very few places you can look and get that outcome. So yeah, for me, BIG is a game changer, and the key is getting the executive board. But you can start small. I can do another talk on this. If nothing else, you can start on your project. If you're a project manager, just take the agenda, work around that and grow out. Or if you're a PMO, you can bring in the monthly progress group. So you don't have to go straight to the main board. If you can, that's great. So I'm going to stop there and recommend all of you to just start engaging with BIG. But to bring in, I think, Alex Shapley, who might have a bit of a 2 cents. Maybe you could talk about sponsorship and stakeholder involvement from his case study. Alex, is there anything you'd like to add?
Because of the significant cultural changes, which are shown in my case study, it had to be driven from C-suite, and it had to be driven from somebody who had clout in C-suite. It was an interesting political organization, and different C-suite directors certainly had different long-term views for the organization. But without that controlling clout, there is no way the changes, that the most significant cultural changes would have been made in my case example. Very interesting to hear what you just said. Thanks.
There you go, David. Maybe we can add that to the slides. Get some clout. But I think to close up what Alex said there was again, the C-suite stand to benefit from BIG more than anyone. So I've personally found it quite easy to get them on board. David, back to you.
Well, thanks, Greg and Alex. I think sponsorship level and stakeholder engagement is really key. Unless we've got the pains and gains to engage these C-level people, we're going to get so far, but can accelerate more perhaps with more senior level backing. So Alex, you're up next. We've done a recording, a more detailed recording for about 20 minutes on Alex's example, so that there is plenty of content available online for folks. But Alex, please signpost what you've done, and I guess it's organizational scope, which is your topic.
Right. So a very quick 1-minute overview. It was a very small organization, less than 150 staff, and in 2.5 years, it went to more than 1,000 permanent staff and probably more than 1,000 third-party contractors and outsourced staff. They had the pains of growing from a micro organization to a structured, medium, or larger organization. They had other big pains. The management information, the data was very inaccurate, inaccessible, missing. Accountability was unclear and often unfair. There was a culture of ignoring risks and issues and only focusing on successes and opportunities. And there was a very strong culture of burying bad news. So you weren't seeing reality, you were only seeing the spin of the good stuff. So I was initially hired as an interim head of projects, programs, change, whatever, to sort out putting in ERP, BI, EPM, and related MIS dashboards. So this was saying get our data under control and get it integrated. We realized that we had accountability problems on the project and program side. So put in RACI, huge pushback against this. But once it was implemented for projects and programs, RACI was then rolled out. So the concept of accountability across the whole organization. So into BAU. We had a problem where risks and issues in particular wouldn't be addressed. So we implemented standard agendas, again, first for projects and programs, and then for BAU. So to force the attendees to look at their issues and risks before they went on to the rest of their agenda. That was a very small thing, but turned out to be hugely effective. So accountability, real information based on evidence-balanced data, making sure that we saw the bad as well as the good, and we had a balance between the two, stopping the unfair accountability of firing the messenger or for standing up and telling the truth. And the one thing that isn't in this slide, making sure that there was clear communication and not spin from the top to the bottom. So when there were strategic imperatives at the top, everybody clearly understood what those strategic imperatives were. And it wasn't that some mid-level director or manager was spinning it because of their own bias. I think as a 1 minute, that's probably a good overview of that slide. Please do go and watch the YouTube. David asked some very good questions in it, which I tried to answer.
You did. You did.
Right. So big scales vertically through an organization, but always depends on creating clear accountability nodes and connecting them through consistent governance practice. What does that mean in simple Alex speak? You can put in different parts of the big framework into an organization, but if you want to be big, if you want to use big most effectively, the framework has to be implemented through the whole organization. And accountability is a key part of this. People know what they are accountable for, and they know what they are not accountable for, and the accountability is fair. People are not being made accountable for something that is impossible or a poisoned chalice. And by having this common structure for accountability throughout the organization, you get consistent governance. Everybody knows what they should expect, and it works effectively in all parts of the organization. So I have flicked through everybody else's case studies, and it seems to be the same message. I mean, David, you can pipe up and tell me if I'm wrong, but to me, everybody's been telling me that accountability starts at the top. And then as we move down through the organization, people are accountable for different things in different chunks. And it must be made clear, not vague, what they are accountable for. And I haven't seen it so clearly in these case studies, but it is very important that people are not being given things that can't be achieved. I have seen that practice many times in big organizations, big bureaucracies, office politics. That might be good for somebody's political win. That is not good for the organizations and the shareholders. Yeah, we want efficiency and efficacy. David.
Well, yes. I mean, that whole fair accountability thing. We've talked about fair accountability with respect to prioritization. I guess it's not fair to somebody to make them accountable for something if they don't have the leadership, time, management support, funding, and resources to actually get on it and achieve. But it's I guess you can't just allocate willy-nilly. You need to make sure that that's balanced across the organization and that everyone has the appropriate slice of the pie. So to me, if we're going to go across an organization, then we need to be able to manage accountability for everyone. And that's what you guys said. Greg, you've got something to chip in?
Yep, really quick one from me. It's the other phrase I've taken from you and others on BIG that goes hand in hand with accountability, and people love. It's the word empowered. Empowerment. Yeah. To say you're empowered to make decisions, to use resources, and we'll trust you as an organization. That's what that empowerment means, but you're accountable for that objective. And when I put the two together, it seems to land really well. That's it for me.
And enabled. You have the resources you need. Yeah.
Can I add something? I think also with this fair accountability, one of those things that BIG solves also is not just making sure that people have the authority, the resources, etc., to do what's expected of them, but also that they're clear about what their mandate is and what their priorities should be. Because if that's not clear to them, and that means they have to be understanding what's going on and what the strategic alignment is and priorities are, etc. If they're not getting that information, they're not being told that there is an opportunity or a risk here somewhere in the organization that they could in fact work on, and that it has priority, for example, or that there's some other thing that they should be doing with a higher priority now because of something else happening somewhere else, then they end up being blamed for not having played their part in fixing whatever it is or taking whatever opportunity is there. And it's simply because they weren't told clearly about it.
Yeah. Well, moving on, just because we've got lots to cover, I'm going to kind of skip past mine just to be sacrificed because we need time for other interesting stuff. The example I've put together is actually described in the Big BOK appendix, so I won't. I'll redonate the time explaining this example to the session itself, but you can read about it in the BOK. But the analysis that I was going to provide was just to look across the examples and see which components my colleagues have used. And looking at the examples, and this is very, very colourful, but in essence, this is a picture or a description of each example. We've used slightly different ways to describe things, but I've looked across these and essentially and followed Chris's schematic really to see from each example where each example added, improved, influenced, or didn't address the major big components. So I've basically looked at the examples to see who really significantly changed any of these components. And it turns out that there's actually some. I've got some data behind this, but it's only on a very small sample size, so I won't bore you with the details. But basically, there were two flavors here. There were people that were using BIG as a bottom-up tool. They were using the facilities in integrated governance to try and develop their situation. And there were other examples which very obviously started top down. So there are definitely two ways you can leverage BIG to take the components and be and localize them and solve your immediate needs to help you in your situation. But as I think several people have said, unless BIG is strategic, it is big, and unless you're prepared to address things like the strategy information model, how you get from purpose to vision to strategy and objectives and through the business, unless you are prepared to tackle that, you're not really being big about things. There's also the better example, the more holistic examples looked more closely at the strategy operating model and focused on addressing how strategy was developed, implemented, and delivered. And the other contrast is that there was some work done on leadership capability and assurance. Strangely enough, so the bigger examples actually had a lot more about assurance within them, but all, of course, looked at improvements to accountability, to the organization, how it was defined, how governance worked, how information and data was used, and clearly most of them also looked at improving processes and tools. I don't think there was one example that didn't include review of process and tools amongst its additional forays into strategy information, operating models, and all the other big components. So then what's the message? What's the key message out of this? So pretty much everybody used most of the big components in their integrated governance example. There were those that leveraged some of the components for local needs, but the bigger and the bigger examples used pretty much everything. Yeah, that's my perception there. And somebody's ask anything else to add, anyone on this? I've tried to be quick to make up some time. Any observations, anyone?
Interesting. No,
it's just analysis, isn't it? It's not particularly exciting, but you guys have used most of the elements of BIG, which is in your examples. So that's reassuring, I can say. It's reassuring.
Well, I think that's also we are talking about integrated governance. So one would expect that we're going to be working across multiple components. And of course, we can do a very localized bit of work to improve the governance. If it's going to be integrated, we need at least 2 units probably, or at least different teams within the same unit that we're now going to get talking to each other and making better decisions. And then it's just a question of, okay, how much benefit do we have a mandate to get, and how much scope are we able to add at this time?
Yeah, exactly. It depends on your sponsor and the pains you're solving and the appetite people have. But Chris, you've got, as I mentioned, you've got 3 examples or 4 examples, and a diminishing amount of time we've got left from folks. Please dive in, give us, and this one we spoke about a lot. There's a link here, and you can find it on the website. There's a long conversation between Chris, myself, and Mohammed Sharif, which covers this in detail. But Chris, give us an introduction, signpost this for us.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, I should point out that Mohammed Sharif was the group IT PMO head in this organization. And this was an international telecoms company that had set up a 3x3x3 strategy, which meant that it was tripling its reach across countries, in a limited number of years, 3 years, and was trying to triple its revenue and also triple some other aspects, like revenue per person, etc. And so they had been through a very rapid expansion from a smallish telecoms company in one country to where they had around 20 plus different countries, subsidiaries within that organization. And one of the challenges they had was that they could not get they were a very hands-on organization. They were a very vibrant organization. They were a great pleasure to work with because everybody from top to bottom wanted to get things done and was prepared to put extra work in to get it done. But because they had so many countries and all inherited different reporting mechanisms, different processes, procedures, they really were struggling to get up-to-date information on all of their projects and strategic initiatives, and even on BAU, KPIs, etc., when they needed them, which basically the executive board met weekly to review all of this stuff and make decisions. So this was a quick-moving organization, as you'd expect in telecoms, right? And so they needed a way to get better information across the board, up and down, right, to all the different management. And then they needed a way to get these country managers who were used to running for their country and doing stuff for their country and their own kind of strategy, if you want, to get them to focus on the group strategy and those group initiatives and group risks and group opportunities where they could make sure they brought everybody together. And as part of that, they were rolling out, one ERM system across all of these countries and across the group. So that was just one of the several programs, multi-million-dollar programs, rolling out content, rolling out networks, rolling out HR practices, all kinds of things, consolidating. And the key strategy was to now be more efficient because they had all this varied ways of doing things, and they needed also to be more efficient, reduce costs. And we started with group IT, and they said, okay, they've just set up a PMO, and now they wanted to get people reporting better, etc. And they could improve their governance. It was all about governance from the beginning. So how do I get better decision making, better information to get decisions? How do I hold people accountable? If I don't have the right information, I can't hold them accountable because they can make all sorts of excuses as to why they didn't do what I want. And so we worked with them to first implement the right kind of processes, project management maturity, a PMIS system, a single system across the all of the countries, right? And we had to start in one place, and we just gradually phased the maturity, rolled that out, and got people to see the benefits. And each country had to voluntarily take this on and pay the money to get their country on board. And so we worked that way.
You mentioned benefits, Chris. We're just running a little bit short of time.
Yeah.
There's a fuller there's a blog and a full recording of this. But in terms of I think you've richly signposted what this example was. Can you move on to talk about the benefits, please, and the benefits that we saw across all of these?
Yeah. So this brought significant benefits, not least because they were forced into a sale of some countries during the project, and that enabled them to get a much better sale price simply because they had all the data they needed and they knew about what value was in those initiatives, even if they hadn't completed. And what we've seen then across all of these case studies, I think, in terms of value received, it comes from having this improved decision making, being able to focus on getting strategic benefits realized. And of course, the earlier we realize strategic benefits, the more value they bring us. And so we can see the benefits ranging from where we've got measurable return on investment on the project, putting it in, to the benefits they're getting from being able to get better value from initiatives earlier. And then we see that benefit that we've been speaking about, I think, already to some extent, where we've got better communication, we've got people working together in teams, we've got people focusing on a common purpose, right? And that means that we've got units no longer working at cross purposes, but actually helping each other get things done. That also surfaces for us the fact that we've got risks or uncertainties. If we can see what's happening in every unit, we can see those things that we couldn't otherwise see, and that means we can address those more proactively, and again, we get value out of that. So that improves our decision making at all levels, and it helps to keep everybody understanding what they're accountable for and giving them what they need to be accountable and for us to hold them accountable. And that means that basically we end up with increased quality across the organization, with that flow of information that helps people get the right things done in the right way at the right time. And whether we start small and local, for in the telecoms, we started with one IT PMO and we tested things and we saw what the benefit was and where we could improve it. And then when we'd fixed that, we rolled that out to more, and then we tested that, etc. So we can start in one place and then move it up as we see the value. We get the financial backing, we get the sponsorship, we get everything else to roll that out to a bigger and bigger area, and we get more value.
Okay, so we're kind of out of time, guys. I know Chris has done. Maybe Chris, we could record this as a little thing and share it. We're just out of time for everyone. Is there some very brief highlights you can share from this?
Well, I think people can read this. I just wanted to highlight the challenge that we typically face, and to think about it from the point of view of a CEO or anybody else lower down in the organization. What is the kind of challenge they face, and how do we address that with BIG? So one of the other case studies I had looks at this, and I think we can look at that, and then we can answer questions on it or do a more full recording on this as well, and add it.
So then we covered a whole load of things, and I won't cover this now, but it's in the content. We'll share it. We've kind of summarized the high level benefits from each of our case examples. So we won't drag everyone through the details of it, but we've got lots of content that's beneath it. We had some time set aside for some questions. We've had a couple pop up, and has anyone got any comments or observations to make on what they've seen so far?
Yeah, very interesting point you made in your case study, David, about balancing between the change and the BAU, so that the strategic work got drowned out or sidelined because of the focus on BAU. I didn't put that in my case study because I've seen it in almost all of the organizations I've ever worked for, and that is something very important. The penny's just dropped. That the fact that we're saying no, we have our day-to-day things, we have to do that, we're taking all your resources away from doing the strategic work. So it means that you're good in the short term, but in the medium to long term, you're injuring your own organization because you're not making the strategic changes that you want to.
That
I had a
one really
conversation.
resonates with me, Alex. That's exactly what I was alluding to earlier. We see it in projects, or at a portfolio level, prioritizing there is one thing, but in BAU, the amount of contention because of poor, unclear, absent prioritization is really something that keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. I come across that one so frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's always that contention between short-term fighting fires and long-term important changes. And I think that's one of the things that integrated governance solves for you. It allows you to balance that properly.
Can I then invite each of our panelists to offer their final words and then open up to further questions if anyone has any. I've put a few examples up here, but you can ignore them. But if you could spend maybe 30 seconds just giving us your thought. What one thing would you ask people to take away from the session if there was one? So I can see you at the top of the screen, Chris. Chris, what's your 30-second takeaway?
I think the main thing is to understand that this is both a complicated and a complex environment that we're dealing with governance. But that doesn't mean it's that difficult to get it right. And you start in one place, you see how things go, you improve it, and you roll it out to others, and you can achieve an awful lot of value by doing that. It doesn't have to cost a whole lot. Okay. We in the telecoms, we worked for a year. They spent maybe 150,000 pounds on it, and they literally got back millions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Veronica, your 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I think, as I said before, I think Frankie's beautiful. What I really like is the diversity. We've got really large, really small, really hyper commercial, public sector, not for profit. We've all used, to a greater or lesser extent, lots of components of BIG. So although I am myself relatively short in stature, I have to reluctantly concede BIG is beautiful. Give it a go. You will see benefit. The more you implement, obviously, the better. But even tactically and even partially, as you showed with your analysis, there are improvements to be had.
Alex, your final 30 seconds.
As a backbone or as an enabler for BIG, it's reliable evidence-based data. If you don't have impartial, balanced data, you're not going to get the information that you need to be able to manage anything. How can you make a decision if you don't know what you're making the decisions on? So it's a part of BIG, but it's an absolutely core part of BIG.
Greg, you'll find your words of wisdom. I think Greg's on mute.
To ask you a question, David, because I think this is really going to help everyone. We haven't spoken much about strategy delivery and how it's going in the world, and it's not going that well. David, can you, in your 30 seconds, I'm going to give you this time back, or whatever's left of it, can you just tell everyone that PMO conference that you went to, you asked 100 people a question. Can you just tell us that story really quickly? I think that's probably the most powerful way to end for me.
Yes, so I went to a PMO conference where the theme of the conference was connecting strategy to delivery, and when I presented BIG, I asked the 100 or so PMO professionals present in the room who was responsible for supporting the connection of strategy to delivery, and and can anyone guess? Well, you know the answer. But the number of people that put their hands up as to knowing who was responsible for supporting the connection of strategy delivery was zero. So I think there's a real gap in the support and ownership of that piece that connects from purpose to vision to strategy and then to delivery. It feels like it's a problematic area, and we desperately try and attack that and bring clarity and connection by using the big framework. And for most of your examples have shown a really good connection of strategy to delivery.
I would add to that, David. Sorry, Greg. I would just add to that I think if you'd asked the same question about the BAU people in their strategy, you would have got the same answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. And I think that colours it in. Actually,
well, guys, we've kind of finished our session really. I was going to make some points which just wrapped up the themes. I'll leave these to just sit there. But to my mind, BIG emerges. It's not just a tactical coordination mechanism that people have used. I think most of the examples here and the compelling examples are where it's that people have implemented an adaptive evidence-based integrated management capability. It's not just about technology or process or people. It's about everything. So that's the thing about BIG, I guess. It's big and it's all encompassing. But what do you guys think? So that's it for today from us. You've met people who've used integrated governance. We've shared with you our pains, talked to you about the sponsorship that we've needed, the organization scope that we've covered, the components that we've used, and touched on the outcomes and benefits. We've talked about top-down and bottom-up implementations, and we've linked you to some examples to Chris's and certainly Alex's examples online. Are there any questions or observations you guys have? Please, the floor is now open. If you still have some energy left after a long day, please chip in, and we'll pick up on any points you raise.